Okay, well, I think we will get started. So, just want to welcome you to our Greek reading group working through Romans. I've been working through this text for almost a year and a half, maybe two. I don't know. It's been a while. We're going to pick up with Romans 4, and we're going to look at verse 13. So I think you can all see my screen. I'm using OneNote, and I'm gonna keep admitting some people. I think every now and then there'll be some people that join us. So by joining this group, you're allowing me to post this and on YouTube platforms and that. If you have a question, please let me know. You can either raise your hand or just speak up and out. So that would be fine as well. So sometimes I clean up the marking, but this is where we were last time. And I wanted to go back and look at just verse 12 real briefly, just because there was a little bit, there's some complexity here with understanding the Abraham and the grammar here. So verse 12, ke patera peritomes, and father of circumcision for those not only from the circumcision, but also to the ones walking, this is a participle, walking in the footsteps of faith in uncircumcision of their father, of our father Abraham. Now this is a huge statement right here. So what's important to see is that this reference to patera, right? That's Abraham, and it's going all the way back to this patera. And this patera is a predicate nominative of this infinitive construction. And this is a purpose infinitive construction in order that he, pronoun, personal pronoun, would be father of all the ones believing through uncircumcision, in order that righteousness would be reckoned to them, and father. So here we have a double predicate nominative. And that's what I wanted to just show is how complex and delayed this is. So this patera is correlated with this patera, and really it's to two people groups. So father of all that are believing through uncircumcision. So he's talking about uncircumcised people, but he's also the father of circumcised to the ones not only walking out of circumcision or from the basis of circumcision, but also, so not only, but also, and here the ka is meaning also for the ones walking. So circumcision for the benefit of, and we maybe could put this into squiggly marks. So what's happening here is that you're having two groups that are identified, and they're walking in the footsteps of the faith of their father. Now, there's a lot of modifiers here, and it's really tricky to kind of break it down. So walking in the faithfulness in uncircumcision, and this faithfulness is belonging to their father, our father, namely Abraham. And that last little thing, Abraham, is an appositional statement explaining who is our father, Abraham. Now, Abraham, remember, is a noun that comes in from Hebrew that doesn't have case endings. And so this is actually genitive. You wouldn't know what case it is except from the context, but it's an apposition to patros, which is genitive, working with the two. And so, wow, what's interesting here is that Paul is explaining that God credited right relating to Abraham when Abraham trusted in God while Abraham was uncircumcised. So before he was circumcised, he trusted God, and God said, okay, I'm going to reckon to you on that basis righteousness, right relating. I'm going to reckon to you this right standing before me, which on the basis of your trusting, your belief, your faithfulness, your trusting. And so Abraham then becomes the father of us all who are believing, and so he's a father equally to those who have the circumcision subsequently to receiving the law, but also he's a father to those who never got that circumcision because when he trusted and believed, he was uncircumcised. So this is a very powerful argument that Paul is making here, and basically laying claim, allowing both uncircumcised people who have faith and circumcised people who have faith for both of those groups to lay claim to the fatherhood of Abraham. Now, this is just really important because what it does is it allows Gentiles, those who are not Judeans, who are not of that lineage, it allows them to lay claim to a family line and therefore also to worship the God of that family line. And the God of that family line is the one true God. And so this is something that I think her name is Paula Friedrichsen argues that's this idea of adoption into a different family allows for the nations, the Gentiles, to have a legitimate cause or basis to worship that family deity. It opens up the family deity of Abraham to everyone who's in his family, and it basically broadens out that family. And so, like, this probably has psychological benefit of legitimacy. It also is a provides maybe socio-political legitimacy that indeed they can worship a different God from their gods that they grow up in. And this issue of which God are you worship and which gods are you allowed to worship was important because Judaism had an umbrella of general respect, even though they were ridiculed by the Greco-Roman populace in certain places and certain times more than others. They were still a recognized, at least legally, able to meet weekly and gather money and organize and meet and gather, and that was what was allowed for them. And so then the question is these early Christians, are they going to be a legitimate religious movement? On what basis would they be so? Politically, they hadn't gained any kind of status as far as the Romans were concerned. And so therefore were potentially seditious, seen as a seditious group, particularly if they're claiming another kind of primary allegiance and someone else who's Lord. They were in uncertain territory. So for Paul to, I think there's some pragmatic benefit and also theological significance, both. I think they can work together to say, hey, there's a common faith that goes back to Abraham, and we are legitimate. Christians, those who follow Christ, are legitimate, and they go back to this broader religious group and are safe under that umbrella. And so Paul doesn't want to leave. He doesn't want to leave, but others might say you've left. And, in Acts, the Christians are accused of, proclaiming another Lord that Caesar is not, and this kind of thing. And so Paul is winning the argument that has implications in many different ways. He's laying claim to a heritage, and Abraham is that linchpin. Now we're going to see that eventually he's going to go back to Adam. He's going to go back even further to Adam and then imply and talk about Christ as the second Adam, undoing the work of Adam. So that's chapter 5. We're heading in that direction. But right now, he's hitting this very squarely about Abraham and laying claim to the fatherhood of Abraham for all people. All right, so he's going to explain this a little bit more in verses 13 and following. So let's keep marking up this text. Ugar, gar, when I see a gar right away, I think of strengthening. So this is going to be providing support for what claims he's just made. And then you have a negative adverb, ugar, for not through the law was the promise to Abraham or to his seed. Now, there is no verb here. It's a null copula verb. We just have to supply an is or a was. So I can write that out in English. This is kind of understood. So the promise was to Abraham or came, and came, the idea of becoming is very easily to use a form, imply a form of yenome, or genomai using Erasmian, yenome, which can mean become or happen, or sometimes in English it seems like when you want to use the word came. So the promise was not through the law to Abraham, or did not come to Abraham through the law or to his seed. Okay. So that's, we are his seed, Paul argues in Galatians. So this is, we're part of the heritage, the descendancy of Abraham. And so this promise did not come through the law. Now, what is that promise? This promise actually is in this infinitive clause. Now, we would call this an epexegetical clause, epexegetical. What this is basically doing is explaining what that promise was, namely that he would be the inheritor of the world. So this is an infinitive clause, which is really functioning appositionally, and it's a substantive idea. Now, why is that? How can you say it's a substantive idea? Well, it's see this article here, this to, it's not going with kleronomon. Kleronomon is from kleronomos, which is masculine. If this is a masculine noun, if this masculine noun were having this article govern it, we'd have a tone kleronomon, but we don't. We don't have that. So this to is working with the ine, the being him inheritor of the world, which is kind of a weird thing. So this is, remember that one function of the article is to substantize, to make something, like to point to an idea, to make something an idea. And that's what happened. That's what's happening here, is that this is an idea that is further explaining what the promise is. So the promise is this idea of him becoming inheritor of the world. Yeah, that's the promise in a nutshell. So yeah, this is an appositional idea. It's called an epexegetical infinitive, and it's articular. It's got the to with it, which is, I think, pointing to it, helping to mark that construction. Yeah. Now, fortunately, to kind of ease this for us readers, the editors of this Greek edition, put this in commas. Remember, those commas weren't originally there, but that helps us to say, now, wait a minute, this is something, some kind of clause set off, or some kind of phrase. And that's why I put it in brackets, is because it has a verbal idea in it, this ine. That's the infinitive from imi, to be. So that's the infinitive form of to be. Okay. What Paul is going to be doing here, as we look at the rest of the sentence, is he's going to be correcting something. So when you see an working with a law and a law, that's a correction. So not this, but something else. And here, the element that is contrasted is normally put right after the "u" to indicate what it is precisely, what element it is that's being corrected. It's not through the law. So the promise was not through the law. Evangelia, the promise was not through the law, but was through the righteousness or the right relating, which is faith, the righteousness of faith. Now, this is a shorthand of a complex of idea that he's been talking about, the righteousness of faith, the righteousness of believing or trusting. And we might ask, what kind of genitive is that? Pisteos, dikeosunes pisteos. And here, I think you could say it's appositional, the righteousness that is faith. I mean, you could say that this is an appositional genitive. So by this point, Paul probably has established that rightly relating to God is trusting God. So another way that we could say it is that it's a genitive of maybe description. It is righteousness that is characterized by faithfulness. And that makes sense too. So either way, there is a combining of these two ideas, justice or righteousness, which I understand is rightly relating, and this pistis space. And again, what is pistis? We tend to think of it as faith, but sometimes it's the faith, capital F. Sometimes it also seems to suggest faithfulness or more like trusting. Other people, I think Scott McKnight, maybe Matthew Bateman, they'll talk about allegiance, which is fine. I think that's all fine. That's all within this idea of placing trust in somebody and then being faithful to that relationship. And the important thing here is that what Paul is arguing is that Abraham trusted in God's promises and that God saw that and said, that is rightly relating to me. And basically, that becomes a paradigm for us when we relate to God, trusting that He claims to be who He is. This idea of trust is foundational to humans' relationship with God. We could go back to the garden and the temptation, at the core of the temptation of the serpent to Eve, and presumably Adam was there, is that God is not trustworthy. Did He really say that? Don't believe Him. That's at the core of it. And John Wesley, interestingly enough, understood unbelief as the basis of what sin is about, not trusting, not trusting. So trust is our rightful relating to God, trusting in His provision, trusting in His promise. And this is important because Abraham was promised something that he believed, and that promise was to be a blessing to the nations. That's what's so beautiful about this is that Paul is going back to the start of it all, going back to the start of God rectifying humanity. So after the fall in the garden, Genesis 2 and 3, you have a degradation of humanity. You see of different kinds of falling. You have Babel and other kinds of settings like that, and then you have the flood. But it's not until Abraham that you have a real proactive plan to go forward. And people will talk about that as being the start of salvation history. Now, I think that's probably overstating it, but still, there's something decisive about Abraham And so for Paul to kind of think through the logic of revelation is quite significant. And that the fact that Abraham believed when he was uncircumcised is huge. And Paul capitalizes that. Now he's going to provide supporting statements for this as well. I see someone has a question. Um, so John asked, do you think the best translation of in the uncircumcision of faith, um, or like a participle phrase, while being uncircumcised? Yeah. Um, yeah. How do you translate that expression here? So now we're going back to here. I think walking in the faith while uncircumcised. I think I think that would do it for me. Walking in the faith, uh, and the "and" is a preposition that often marks a container in something. So it's in the space of uncircumcision. That's what the space is, and that's the space in which our father had faith. So in that circumstance, in that space of uncircumcision, yeah. So who walked in the faith of their father Abraham in or while he was uncircumcised. Yeah. So it's a space, and that's a controversial space, right? For Paul, for the Galatians, for here in the Romans, in the aftermath of that discussion, it's a contested space, and how do people live in that space? That's the question. All right. So in verse 14, he's going to further substantiate egar eu. So I'm going to do some marking. Eu ek nomu kleronomou. For if the inheritors from faith. Now here there's a null copula again. We have to supply a were or an are. We have to supply an are implied. So for if the inheritors were from faith, or I'm sorry, from law. So if the inheritors are from or on the basis of the law, so from the law, the revelation of the law, and all of its aftermath, then this is the main clause. There's an implied then here. Now, sometimes this is a conditional sentence. Sometimes the then is actually implicit or explicit in the Greek text. You can add an ara if you wanted to really ramp up the logic. Um, this is a conditional sentence. This first part with the e is called the supposition or the protasis. And then the conclusion is the main sentence, and it's called the apodosis or the conclusion. Then faith would be made empty or void, and the promise would be nullified, would have been nullified. Now, these are perfect tense verb forms. Kekano te is from kanoo, which means to be made empty, be made in vain, something like that. We often see this in a noun form used by Paul talking about having faith in vain and that kind of stuff. So here he uses the verbal form, which is a perfect tense, which is really stressing what it would become. And then this is also a perfect verb form from kat ergeo. This is a trickier form. It is a contract verb that ends in epsilon, the stem, which lengthens to an eta. And then it's a compound verb with kata on the front. So it's kat ergeo. The epsilon lengthens to an eta because that's the reduplication. So this is indeed a perfect tense verb form, third singular, middle passive and form. And so it would be translated, it means to like annul or come to naught. It's like it's a legal term of bringing to nothing, to nullify. And so this is a very serious consideration here. So we translate it this way: for if the inheritors are from the law, then faith would be useless or pointless, and the promise annulled. It would be revoked or brought to nothing. When I look at this conditional sentence, I always like to ask what kind it is. So if you go to my Koine Greek Grammar, chapter 26, second to last chapter, I look at conditional sentences in detail and provide a taxonomy and different systems for how to understand it. This is an interesting one to consider. E with an implied indicative, I think there's an implied indicative here, would be some kind of simple condition, either past or present. So either a present simple setup, present or past. But we also have to look at the apodosis, the conclusion. So I think it's some kind of simple condition. And the question is what's the time frame? So if the inheritors were from the law, then our faith would be empty and the promise has been nullified. And I have to really translate it. It has become empty and has become nullified. So that it's hard to translate that perfect tense. So what's the time frame there? Is that because the perfect tense is something's happened in the past, but with continued results up to and including the present. So it's kind of hard to know how to classify this. Is that past tense orientation or a present tense orientation? I think it's present tense orientation, which would then make this a present simple condition. Okay, but it's tempting to take this as a contrary to fact condition. Now, what is a contrary to fact? A contrary to fact is going to typically involve an on, and it's going to be saying this is a conditional particle, which is not present here. And this kind of condition would be saying, I'm going to state this, and for the sake of argument, that it's a hypothetical thing and it's not true, but I'm going to state it and I'm going to let you know that it's not true. And it would be translated something like this: for if the inheritors were on the basis of the law, then it would have been that faith would be made vain and the promise nullified. So if it would have been this way, if it were this way, then this is how it would have happened. And it would be saying this is not true, that the supposition would be false, and therefore the conclusion would be false. But Paul doesn't use that construction, the present contrary to fact. He uses a present simple construction. And the reason why is because he wants people to see that logic, that if this were true, then this results. This indeed results. Now, again, I think it's curious he's not using the contrary to fact, but I think he wants people to say, I think he's using the present simple because indeed some people think this. Some people think that it's this way, and their faith has become in vain. And the promises for them are nullified. Who are such people? Well, these are people who believe in still coming under the law. They still believe that the nations need to be circumcised and come under Judaism in that regular kind of way through becoming proselytes. through converting and becoming more appropriately looking, standard, typical, socio-politically identified Judeans in a way that is seen through circumcision, food, laws, observance, Sabbath observance, and these kinds of things. There are, in fact, people who believe that. And Paul would be saying, your faith, you're making the faith empty and you're nullifying the promise. In fact, if you believe that way, then you're changing the nature of Abraham's faith and you're actually changing the nature of the promise. You're nullifying it. So I think that's why he uses what I would call here at present simple condition because it states it really bluntly in view of the present reality. Okay, now he's going to further support that by using a gar. So what we're seeing here is a piling up of gars. He is supporting, and here he's going to support that point by saying the law works out wrath or establishes wrath, but where this is an adverb, the ude is an adverb, u is an adverb of location, means like where, but where there is not a law, neither is there transgression. Now, this is, I think, a fairly straightforward kind of statement. It's basically saying the law points to things that we should and shouldn't do. And so when we do or don't do those things, we get punishment, we get wrath, orge. It establishes or works out wrath. Now, this concept of wrath was found in chapter 1, established there, that we face that wrath if we live poorly and badly. So that's been established that that is this is how the world is structured. So now he's Paul is discussing and he discussed law there as that the Judeans, the Jews have the oracles of God, and this is a benefit to them. But those very same oracles tell us that we have a sin problem. So that's chapter 3. Chapter 3, you have that long list of quotations from Psalms and Isaiah, and then saying that all are under sin. All have sinned and are falling, present tense, short of the glory of God. So here, Paul is establishing, he's using this statement to support what he's just said. So I think at this point, he's saying the law doesn't establish faith. It rather points to our sinfulness and are being subject to wrath and punishment. So where there is no law, there is no transgression. Now, there's a lot of different words for transgression here, for sinning and transgression, and they all construe something just a little bit different, right? So we have amartia, which means sin in general. You've got paraptoma, which is like a stumbling fall. And here you have parabasis. There's other words as well. So it's interesting it'd be interesting to kind of look at each of these words for sinfulness or transgression or misstep and understand that they're each construing something just a little bit different in the sin environment or the process or the consequences or the fact of the sin. Here, you've got a parabasis is this is from Benno or Bino using Erasmian. So Bino and means like a step. So Bino, it's from that root. And then a para means to step outside of, beside of that. So not being in it, but stepping outside of it. So where there is no law, there is neither no misstep. So this is something that Paul is going to talk about even further, is that Why was the law given? What was the purpose of the law? Yes, it's given within a context of covenant and faithfulness and seeking people to be faithful, but the performance of the law itself was not possible, was not done. It wasn't accomplished. And the thing is, I mean, this gets to a very complicated kind of question: is what was the purpose of the law, and what's Paul's understanding of the law? But when we think about the law itself, we're talking about the covenant that was given to Moses and to the people, and how to maintain relationship, or how to do and try to be pleasing to God, how to properly fear him, how to properly love him. But what's interesting about the law itself, the law proper, is that it contains mechanisms for sacrifice, for missteps. And it's almost like the law and the covenantal law points beyond itself, because it itself is not going to be performed perfectly. And so even within the Torah proper, the five books of Moses, in Deuteronomy, even in the law code itself, there is a looking forward to a time of punishment if they don't obey, and the need to have a circumcised heart. So the law itself, the law code in all of its stipulations and in its covenantal context, is something that points beyond itself. So then we're left thinking, well, what was the purpose of the law? And Paul is concluding, well, it defines trespass. It defines trespass, and it works out wrath. It works out a system of punishments and forewarns of punishment and even national calamity, if they don't follow it. I mean, you have this laid out at the end of Deuteronomy, that there's going to be a way of life and a way of death, and it has to do with obedience or not. Okay, so yeah, Paul uses this statement to support that the inheritance is not from the law, because the law only establishes wrath, because it helps define trespass. And so that's a very interesting point. And so therefore he says, dia tuto, for this reason, ekpisteos, dia tuto. Now, dia tuto, I could put this in a box because it's functioning like a connector. It is specifying some idea, and bringing it forward inferentially. For this reason, on account of this, therefore, ek pisteos. It is on the basis of faith. Now, once again, this is a null copula situation. There is no verb of being. We just have to supply it. It is by faith. Now, what is the it? What is the it? Well, presumably it's the promise. I think it's the promise that is coming forward. The promise is on the basis of faith. In order that, and then you have a purpose clause, it would be according to grace. Again, no verb. We're just supplying a lot of verbs. And I think as beginning Greek students, looking at texts like this, it can be very difficult to just jump in and start translating, is because Paul often will elide the verb. He will imply it'll be there'll be ellipsis, and he'll just assume either previous verb, or here he's assuming a readily uh, supplied verb, a verb of being. On account of this, it was on the basis of faith. That is, the promise was on the basis of faith. in order that it would be katakaren. Um, it'd be according to grace, favor. Okay, it would be on the basis of favor. Now, this idea of favor is patronage kind of language. Um, And so we do have a move from means to end, because whenever you have a purpose construction, right, you have a means working towards an end. So ina is marking the goal or intention. And so we have to ask, well, whose intention? And we have to go back and say, well, this is God's intention. And that's why he set things up the way that he did. We'd have to say is that he's gonna offer it on according to grace. So it's on the basis of trust in order that it would be on the basis of favor or grace. And then we have another purpose. So this goal of it being by grace further becomes a means to another goal. And so this is where we have to pay attention to a means goal. There's a building up of intentionality here that Paul is wanting us to understand that there's purpose behind how things were done. And presumably we're talking about God's intention. Who else's would it be, really? So in order that. So this is the isto ina. This is a preposition working with the article with the infinitive to express purpose. And the the subject of this infinitive is going to be in the accusative case, tain epangelion. And that's why I was saying all along that what's in focus here is indeed the promise. So the promise, in order that the promise, tain epangelion, would be assured, would be confirmed, bebeon. Now this is an adjective, and I'm putting a single underline there because it's the predicate adjective working with the subject, and these are accusative case because of the construction working with ine. And that's kind of when you have infinitive constructions, typically they take accusatives for their subjects. The only exception is when that subject refers back to the subject of the main clause. But that's relatively rare. I could point that out to you, but that's a weird exception. But 98% of the time, the accusative case subject, we think of an accusative case subject working with infinitives. So in order that the promise would be assured to all the seed, and not only to the, so here the monon is working together. So notice that monon means only. So not only to the from the law. Now here's the use of the article to represent a further referent to spermati. So the toe is implying a spermati, the seed. So not to the seed only from the law. And then here's the correction. Ook working with the Allah, but also. So there's a lot of what I would call correlative emphasis here, where you don't simply have an Allah or Allah, you have monon Allah ke. So you're having these extra adverbs thrown into there to add even more prominence to the statement. Allah would have been not this but this. That's fine. There's already a correction taking place. But when you add the monon, not only to the seed from the law, but also the only and also are ramping it up to really stress this point. And here we have two types of seed. You've got seed that comes from the origin of the law, the people group that are of the law group that come out of that environment. And then you also have also the one from the faith of Abraham, who is the pater panton aemon, the father of us all. Okay, now this os at the end here is starting a relative pronoun clause. There really should be no, um, I don't know where that came in. There shouldn't be any, that shouldn't be there. It should just be uh, a a bracket because this is starting a relative pronoun clause. Now, we have to kind of think about this because I'm a little bit surprised that he stated it this way. So, uh, the promise would come to the ones under the law, not only them, but also to the ones from the faith of Abraham. That may imply that those under the law don't have this faith or exempted from that faith or don't have it, don't need it, maybe, don't need it. And this gets into a reading of Romans, which I resist. I would probably say even reject, proposed by someone like Stanley Stowers. Um, and maybe I think it goes back to Krister Stendahl that you have two peoples of faith, two pathways that are legitimate right now. You've got the original Abrahamic through the law group, the Jews, Judeans, and they can just keep doing what they do. But then Christ came and then he opened another pathway. I guess Paul would say, presumably, there's some of them came over, but it's mainly for the Gentiles. So you have these two pathways that are acceptable. This verse could be used to maybe support that, could possibly be used because you got, the promise coming to the seed, and then you have from the law seed, but not only that, but also to the ones of the faith of Abraham. That could be the seed, the B seed, plan B or group B or whatever. Um, but I don't think that's what Paul intends here. And the reason being is that he includes himself. Part of the reason is that he includes himself, us, us all, so that he is father of us all. So I'm thinking that, why does Paul use the we, all of us here, father of all of us? Who is the father of all of us? Notice that Abraham is being specified as father precisely on this point of faith. So by expanding on Abraham right here, and then Paul using a first person plural, us, all of us, he is implying that 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 faith is applicable and needed for both groups. So I think he's stressing particularly this latter group, and their legitimacy, on the basis of the faith. So all along, faith has been stressed that you need this faith, need this faith, need this faith. And so it seemed weird if this at this point he would say, well, you got a plan, you got two groups of people, and the Jews can keep working with the law, but faith is for another group. To me, that would just seem bizarre. Also, later on in chapter 9, Paul talks about being distressed greatly distressed because of his own kinsfolk in the flesh who presumably don't believe that he wishes he could be accursed for their sake. So why would he have such pain and anguish if this is a legitimate pathway for them? So I don't think that that's the case. All right. Any questions? We got just a couple minutes here before we'll stop for
I
today.
I asked that the kenotai, that empty. Is it possible to translate it as meaningless, or is possible or not?
Meaningless up here in verse
Yeah,
14.
kenotai.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, somehow to be meaningless. Yeah.
Yeah.
Empty, in vain.
Yeah,
The
because
faith
in
is
English expression, the faith becoming empty or faith becomes meaningless. Meaningless
yeah,
is also more kind
yeah,
of meaning wise is more
yeah,
precise to me.
yeah, yeah. I think you're right. Meaningless. Yeah. Meaningless, emptied out of significance. Yeah, agreed.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, yeah. Anyone else?
Yeah, just Matthew Thiessen, his book Paul and the Gentile Problem is it's one of these books that's really popular right now. He really looks at Galatians and looks. His argument is that Paul actually believed that the Gentiles literally became descendants of Abraham through the Spirit in a we would call it in a like in a
Yeah,
physical sense through the reception of the Spirit.
yeah.
Um,
Huh.
Almost like spiritual changing their DNA. But I find it interesting that Paul doesn't need to talk about the Spirit. Um, the Spirit is not required. Here, he doesn't talk about the Spirit, but he still talks about the Gentiles becoming heirs of Abraham by faith. So I think this passage kind of challenges his reading. And for Paul, he might talk about faith and the promise. He might talk about receiving the Holy Spirit. Like he doesn't, I think this is a problem for Matthew Thiessen's reading.
Yeah, I mean, I guess he would have to argue, well, Paul's not unpacking that part of it yet. But but the promise is associated with the Spirit, the promise language elsewhere in Paul. I mean, in Ephesians 1, it's the promise, the Holy Spirit of promise. But yeah, why he's not working that out here explicitly. Yeah, I mean, I'm all over the Spirit. For me, for the early Christian movement, the giving of the Spirit was the sign of God's approval. It was an experiential moment where they could say, look, he's accepting them as they are before they're even baptized, even, So, but to take it that next level, I think maybe is problematic too much, like what you're saying. And this passage, the fact that Paul doesn't have to draw on the Spirit. Now, I would argue that he has already brought in the Spirit in terms of Gentiles, the nations, in chapter 2. So in 2, 14, 15, 16, and then in 2, 26, he talks about the Spirit there or implies the Spirit in 14 through 16. So I think he's already talked about a set of redeemed Gentiles who have circumcision credited to them because of the work of the Spirit in their hearts. But so maybe that's why he can delay or or doesn't need to specifically refer to it here because he's already brought up the Spirit in the past. But but yeah, good point, John. Thank you. All right. Well, glad to have you join us, and we look forward to having you join us next time, next Tuesday. We'll pick up in verse 17. Take care, everybody.